Storytelling has the power to engage others, to motivate, to change the world. We all know a good story when we hear one, and unfortunately also know a bad one when we hear that as well. Today we're going to talk about stories and how stories can work for you. Unless you're a fiction writer, most stories are written after the event. Seemingly random events make sense. Intuitively, it all flows together. The human brain has a remarkable talent for making sense out of randomness. A great story recreates the event in the listener's minds. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about stories, the chemicals in the brain, the history of stories. Should be fun. But first, a story. And this is a story about responsibility and consequence. This is Tiffy. My granddad was raised in Southern Illinois, and he showed beagles in field trials. So we were a dog family. Now there are cat families and there's dog families. There's cat people, there's dog people. We're dog people. I don't get cat people. Maybe someday I will. I'm not. I'm a dog person. We were taught the responsibility that came with having a dog, the responsibility to the dog, and the responsibility to the people that interacted with that dog. So it was the summer of 1961, and we were about to learn the lesson of responsibility of people that own a dog. My brother, 2 years older than me, was 8. I was 6. My sister was 2. We were walking through our neighborhood, little neighborhood that was launched for returning veterans from World War II. You know, the great generation. We had the tar road with the rocks on it. We're walking Tiffy, and some boys, older boys, grown-up guys, probably were shaving. They were 11. They were on the other side of the street, and they were throwing rocks at Tiffy. Tiffy started barking. We didn't have Tiffy on a leash. He's just with us. But when he started barking, we grabbed his collar because Tiffy was a little bit perturbed at these guys for throwing sticks and rocks. Well, Tiffy wrenched free from our grasp, started to run across the street. And as he did, a little girl came by on her bicycle. The timing was absolutely wrong. Tiffy's mouth is open. The girl's leg and Tiffy's mouth intersected, and blood was drawn. Well, we knew as dog owners that if your dog draws human blood, there's a consequence. And we knew what that consequence was. We came home, told my mom. She waited till my dad came home, and we all talked. We pleaded Tiffy's case. We said, Tiffy wasn't biting somebody, her teeth, her leg met. And my dad said, guys, you know the consequence. So the following weekend came. My mom took my brother Tim, my sister Cass, and me out in her blue Ford Falcon for a little shopping trip. And my dad put Tiffy in the station wagon and left on his mission. Well, he came back, and we knew what had happened. We weren't excited about it, but we knew. And my dad said, I took Tiffy to a farm. Well, we knew what had really happened. We knew Tiffy had been put down, and it was a really hard lesson for a 6-year-old boy. 6-year-old boy to learn about the responsibility and consequences for one's actions and for those actions under your command. Responsibility and consequences. So human stories began when we all sat around the campfires. These stories have been recorded on walls of caves. They've been passed down generationally. If we look at the Christian Bible, there were poems, there were narratives that allowed that story to be passed on before it was finally put to paper. The Chinese actually invented paper and brought it. We had it in the European world starting in about 1150. Gutenberg, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, commercialized the printing press. He invented it in 1440, commercialized it in 1450. The power that it had was amazing. Other technologies have been critical in doing this. We know in the military, we've got signal flags, we have flashing light, we have crypto gear today. Little story you all might not know about Vice Admiral Nelson, Lord Nelson. 1801, Battle of Copenhagen. Admiral Parker is leading the British forces. Vice Admiral Nelson has got his part of the fleet. Admiral Parker hoists a message on the signal flag to disengage. Now, Lord Nelson, if you don't know this, was blinded a couple years before in one eye. Lord Nelson's lieutenant said, "Sir, there's a message up on the signal on the hoist." Nelson put the long glass to his blind eye and said, "I see nothing. Continue the fight." That's actually the origin of turning a blind eye. Pretty amazing. So brain chemicals. As much as we like to believe that we make the decisions that we make based on logic, simply isn't the case. We act on emotion. And scientifically speaking, emotion is a chemical reaction. If you want to prompt your audience into action, you need to tell stories, because storytelling is a way of engaging the brain in a way that other forms of communication simply can't. Stories have the ability to produce chemicals and hormones. Dopamine is everybody's favorite party guest. When dopamine is released, our brain's learning systems are activated, arousal or pleasure come to mind. Dopamine causes your audience to really feel something which will help. Maybe focus, maybe motivation, maybe memory. To produce dopamine, you need to tell a story that piques interest. And you do this with an interesting question, a cliffhanger, a plot twist. Now, cortisol, another brain chemical, that's the stress hormone. That's the one that says, listen up. There's something to be learned here. But you got to take cortisol in small doses. Otherwise, it'll disengage. This is the dangerous one. You don't want to OD on cortisol. Oxytocin. This is the chemical that floods a mother's body after the birth of her baby. This is the one that bonds you with your audience. It's the key to evoking sympathy and empathy. It'll keep the audience engaged. And to produce this chemical, you need to tell stories that tug at the heartstrings, make your audience feel more human. Endorphins. You've always heard about exercise producing endorphins, the runner's high. I can tell you, I tried. I never got the runner's high. I guess I can't run that long. But they make you laugh. They make you feel good. All joking aside, telling funny stories and silly anecdotes can help to bring the audience in. These chemicals are like parts of a cocktail. Mix them in the right doses, you've got a great story. Here's an example of one of the shortest short stories I've ever heard. Back in 1987, in one of our many attempts at the war on drugs, there was a little commercial that was put out. It showed a man grabbing an egg, and he said, "This is your brain." Then he picked up a frying pan that had grease, and he said, "This is drugs." He broke the egg, it went into the pan, and he said, "This is your brain on drugs." Great example of cortisol and dopamine being used together in the right dose. So you've got to be able to select the right type of story for the right audience. Recently, I had the great privilege of running a lunch program in Marin County for the homeless. We made a lot of lunches over 38 weeks. Now, if I were having to report this to two different audiences, I'd tell the story very differently. The first, let's say I was going to the session, that's like the board of directors. What I would report to them likely was, ladies and gentlemen, we've been running this program now for 38 weeks. We've delivered 7,790 lunches. The first week we did 82 lunches. Second week, 82 lunches. Third week, 184 lunches, and on and on and on. We had 12 people supplying lunches. The first week we topped out at 26. It's been a great program. We expect it to continue. A lot of dopamine, a little bit of oxytocin. The second story, though, is about Tom and the bag of rotting oranges. It was the last week before Christmas for the lunch program. It was the Wednesday. We do this every Wednesday. We picked up 306 lunches that day. the first time we'd ever gotten close to 300 and we went over it. I put the lunches in the car, delivered them to a friend's church over in a really tough part of the Bay Area. He buries 5 or 6 congregants every year to guns. There's gunshots regularly. It's not an easy place. Out in front, they had 2 tables set up with Christmas presents for the people in the neighborhood. You didn't have to be a member of the church. You just had to show up there. Everybody that was there got both a present, maybe it was a basketball for a little boy or a girl, a backpack, a doll, whatever it was. They got that, and everyone in the family got a lunch. It was so cool. As Curtis and I were leaving, we went over to the side of the church and started to grab his big trash receptacle to move it inside the church parking lot that has to be padlocked. Well, it was still full, so we left it there. As we're walking away, Tom, this homeless guy, thinking that we're not looking, opens it up and grabs a bag of rotting oranges. Starts to walk away with these rotting oranges. And Curtis goes, Tom, you can't do that. It's going to make you sick. And Tom said, I know, Pastor, but I'm just so hungry. So we took Tom around and he got a lunch. Okay, that's dopamine, cortisol, and a heavy dose of oxytocin. So how do you tell a story? In the movie The Dead Poets Society, I don't know if any of you remember that, it was a while back. Robin Williams plays the instructor. At the beginning, pardon me, at the beginning of one of the scenes, he has a young man read the equation for what makes a good story. And at the end of the guy reading the equation, he goes, excrement. There is no equation. The audience will tell you if it's a good story. So, but telling the story, then how do you do it? How do you set it up? What do you do? Well, in this case, the Tiffy story, if you will, the gap setting the story up. First thing, Tiffy drawing blood. You've got to earn the attention of the audience. Maybe it means inhabiting a character. In this case, I was the 6-year-old boy standing across the street from the 11-year-old boys throwing sticks and rocks. I used a dynamic tone shift, Tiffy breaking the skin and the consequences. When you're telling a story, it's important that you make eye contact, that you look at people, and you don't just glance. You got to look. You got to hold it. It's got to be at least 3 seconds, or it doesn't count. And you got to own the story. Practice it. Make it your own. It is your own. Here's an example of a fun story I got to give a while ago. Oakland Hills. There's a lot of mentions of the Bay Area in this talk, and I appreciate you allowing me to do that. I was asked to talk about priorities in life. I used the Oakland Hills fire of 1991 as the example. The fire raged for quite a few days, destroyed hundreds of houses, killed 36 people, millions of dollars in damage. What would happen would be you'd be in your house, knock on the door, and it's a policeman, a fireman, EMTs, whatever. They'd say, you got 30 minutes. Get what's important and get out. It's a great exercise to go through. What would you do if you had 30 minutes? What would you take? What's the important stuff in your life? After you've taken that inventory, you've got to ask yourself the question, am I living with those things as the priorities in my life? If I take the pictures of my kids, how much time am I spending with my kids? It's a good story. It's a great story. But then I did a shift. So there was one home up in Oakland Hills, beautiful area, incredible homes. They got the knock. They had 25 minutes, they were told. You got to get the important stuff and get out. Well, they had a beautiful wine cellar and they had a swimming pool, but they didn't have enough vehicles to put all the wine in the car and get out. So they formed a bucket brigade. The dad standing in waist deep water in the pool, nice cold water. For those of us that love wine, you like cold. The dad standing in the water. The mother is organizing the bucket brigade. Bottles are handed from child to child to child to the dad. He put them on the floor of the pool, saved them all. They got out, they got in their cars, they left. 2 weeks later, they're allowed back in the house. His fate would have it, good fortune, the house was saved, no problem whatsoever. But you know what happened to the wine? The labels all were floating on the top. They had to start enjoying the inside of the bottle rather than the outside of the bottle. We put labels on people. We see Ferris with his beer and go, what's this guy like? We label people. It's important to open up the bottle, get to know the people, get to know what's inside. The length of your story. 2 quotes up here, the only quotes I'll read here. One I love them both actually. The first, I'm sorry that I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. Abraham Lincoln. This second story is attributed to a number of different people. The one that I know the best is a president, I think it was Woodrow Wilson, was asked if he could give a talk. He said, well, how long is the talk? And they said, well, what does that matter? And he said, well, if I'm supposed to speak for 10 minutes, I'll need a week to prepare. If I'm to speak for 15 minutes, I can prepare in 3 days. If to speak a half an hour, 2 days. If an hour, I'm ready to go right now. So make the story as tight as you can. The story isn't about how many fancy words you can use. It's about recreating a wonderful experience in the audience's mind. My shortest speech. Ferris knows this story, I think. So I was at the Oakland Clean Job Summit about a couple weeks before the 2016 election. We were talking to people about how to get green jobs. This is an area, we call it the hole of the donut. There's great wealth in the Bay Area. It hasn't touched a lot of Oakland. So my job was, I had the dubious distinction of being the last speaker right before lunch. The one that people would just finish your story and get out of here. We had Mayor Schaaf, Libby Schaaf did a great job. We had a number of really key people. I still have no idea why I was one of the speakers, but I was. So I get up there and I'm supposed to talk about investing in clean tech. If you want to turn a group of people off right before lunch, give them a good long speech about cash flow analysis and how to make money in clean tech. You'll know real quick it's not a good speech. So here's my speech. So does anybody here know who Johann Fust was? I didn't allow them to use Google. You can if you want, but please don't. Nobody knew. So, okay. Does anybody know who Gutenberg was? Well, we all know who Gutenberg was. We talked about him before. 1440, invented the printing press. 1450, commercialized it. Johann Fust financed him. And I sat down. That was the story. That was it. Okay, you got to know when it's time to go. There's a great little game that the admirals play when they go to listen to speeches, changes of command or the like. One admiral will give a number. This is how many minutes they think this speaker is going to speak. If the admiral says 13, the other admiral gets to say over or under. Whoever wins the bet, the other guy has to buy him a drink. It's a great bet. I guide you all to be the person that they know is always going to be under. Make your speech shorter than expected, but not embarrassingly so. Leave them wanting more. And one of the best judgments of a great story, one of the best judgments to me is when after the story, somebody says, how did you know that's what I was thinking about? So know your audience, get to know them, tell them the story. Now, I'm going to close with Tiffy, part 2. You remember when my dad came back from taking Tiffy and he told us that he took Tiffy to a farm. Well, it's 12 years later. Cass, my sister's now 14, I'm 18. getting ready to head off to the beautiful school on the Severn. My brother's 20, just finishing his youngster year. And we're sitting around with my mom and dad having a serious conversation. And the conversation was about, as a parent, when do you tell kids hard stories, or when do you try to soften the blow? And my mom and dad were asking, and said, well, why do you ask that? And was, well, 12 years ago, when Tiffy bit that girl, you took Tiffy and you put her down. And you helped us by saying that you had taken her to a farm, but we knew you had put her down. My dad, with a lump in his throat, my dad, Bobby will remember Bubber with a lump in his throat and a tear in his eye, said, I took Tiffy to a farm. Thanks.